Good morning once again, everyone. I'm so glad that y'all could join me. Yesterday, we left off on Genesis, at the end of Genesis 30. Jacob has his family. Now God has increased his wealth in order so that he can take care of his family. And now God is telling him, okay, now you're ready. Go back into the promised land. Verse 1. Genesis 31. And he heard the words of Laban's sons, saying, Jacob hath taken away all that was our father's, and of that which was our father's hath he gotten all this glory. So Laban's sons are angry because Jacob now has a tremendous amount of Laban's wealth. And Jacob beheld the countenance of Laban, and behold, it was not toward him as before. Laban became angry with him. And I'm certain that his sons, there's a reason I believe why Laban's sons are mentioned before Laban is in this chapter, because usually you'll find this out with family and friends. If they believe that there's an injustice, and if there's even a hint of an injustice done to you, then they'll oftentimes fuel that fire. And that may have been what happened right here, was Laban's sons and his friends were telling him, oh, you've been cheated, even though he hasn't been cheated. The agreement which Laban agreed to was of the increase of the spotted of the flocks, then Jacob would receive. That's what happened. And the Lord said unto Jacob, Return unto the land of thy fathers, and to thy kindred, and I will be with thee. And Jacob sent and called Rachel and Leah to the field unto his flock, and said unto them, I see your father's countenance, his facial expression, that is not toward me as before, but the God of my father hath been with me. And ye know that with all my power I have served your father. So this is pretty crucial, because everyone knew, including the daughters of Laban, whom became Jacob's wives. They all knew, everybody knew that Jacob had done right by Laban. And he's making that a very crucial point right here. He says, you know, I've never cheated your father at all. And your father hath deceived me, and changed my wages 10 times. But God suffered him not to hurt me, meaning God didn't allow Laban to hurt him. If he said thus, the speckled shall be thy wages, then all the cattle bear speckled. And if he said thus, the ring-straked shall be thy hire, then bear all the cattle ring-straked. Thus God hath taken away the cattle of your father, and given them to me. And it came to pass at the time that the cattle conceived, that I lifted up mine eyes, and saw in a dream, and behold, the rams which leaped upon the cattle were ring-straked, speckled, and gristled, meaning they were all going to be part of Jacob's flock. They were all spotted and such. And the angel of God spake unto me in a dream, saying, Jacob. And I said, Here am I. And he said, Lift up now thine eyes, and see, all the rams which leap upon the cattle are ring-straked, speckled, and gristled. For I have seen all that Laban doeth unto thee. God is telling Jacob, while during this beginning of the 6-year increase that he was going to have, he said, I seen this years ago. And he's being told, I've seen how Laban's treated you, Jacob. He said, now will I do this for you. I am the God of Bethel, where thou anointest the pillar, and where thou vowest a vow unto me. Now arise, get thee out from this land, and return unto the land of thy kindred. And Rachel and Leah answered and said unto him, this is very interesting, Is there yet any portion of or inheritance for us in our father's house? And this is right after Jacob tells them, we're all leaving. We're going to go hundreds of miles away. You're going to be way, way away from your father. And he makes his case first. Tells them about his dream and the vision and what the angel and what God told him. And now this is their response. They said, where's the increase? Where's our inheritance from our father? And now they're saying how they totally agree with him. Are we not counted of him strangers? For he hath sold us, and hath quite devoured also our money. For all the riches which God hath taken from our father, that is ours and our children's. Now then, whatsoever God hath said unto thee, do. This is the first time that we read that these sisters actually agree with one another in years. It has been years, and they're meeting with the mindset of, we both have one common enemy, and it's Laban. It says an awful lot about the family situation right here. It must have been very toxic. It almost to the point of being unbearable. Jacob obviously sees this, and God himself sees that it's unbearable to them. So it's best to get away. Then Jacob rose up and set his sons and his wives upon camels. This speaks to the wealth that Jacob had acquired, because it cost an awful lot to buy camels for travel, and they would be going hundreds of miles. So having all of his servants come with him, all these flocks, this was a very expensive process that he would have to go through, and he was wanting to get it done quickly. And he carried away all his cattle and all his goods which he had gotten, the cattle of his getting which he had gotten in Padanaram, for to go to Isaac his father in the land of Canaan. And Laban went to shear his sheep, and Rachel had stolen the images that were her father's. There were these little teraphim, is what they were called, these little gods that they would worship, and they'd have these things scattered throughout their homes quite often. This is much of what they would look like back then. Now people have replaced these with Xboxes and PlayStations. You can just name tons of things that people worship that are just little handheld things, if you will. Your smartphone, people worship their smartphone. And this was basically what they would talk to back then. They'd look at then, they would worship then. Now it's everybody's on their phone. It's no more looking up, it's looking down at your phone. That's what they worship, seemingly. And Jacob stole away unawares to Laban the Syrian, and that he told him not that he fled. He didn't want to tell him, because he knew Laban was a trickster, just like he was. And he didn't want to deal with that attitude anymore. And it's almost like God showed him he put a mirror up to Jacob, and he said, you really like what you see right here? I'll send you to someone worse than you. And now you can tell, you know how it takes that sometimes. I remember whenever I was getting into fighting, into the competitive fighting, and boxing, MMA, and whatnot. And I remember I was just all about it. And then I went to one of the matches, and I seen just the environment of it all, and how everybody was it was just evil. If I had to use just one plain word, evil. It didn't seem like no one was rested. Everyone seemed to be, there was camaraderie, but there wasn't any kind of goodness involved in it. Everybody was getting beat up, and I got beat up, and I remember and I've beaten up more people than I've actually been beaten up. So that kind of let me see, it put me in the other spot of these other men that I had beaten up before. And after seeing it for myself and being on the other side, I learned so much more. And I told people, I said, that's the best butt whooping I ever took. Best whoop. I mean, because it woke me up all of a sudden, and it showed me myself. It showed me who I was. And I said, I don't want to do this anymore. You know, this isn't the kind of life that I want to live. And I would say that Jacob is dealing with the same type of situation. So he fled with all that he had, and he rose up and passed over the river and set his face toward the Mount Gilead. Now this was him on his way home. Home was about 500 miles away. He was about 300 miles at this point. And that's a quick pace to be going at, but he's around 300 miles. He's getting there. And it was told Laban on the third day that Jacob was fled. This shows you their living arrangements and where they lived and how far apart that they lived when they resided with Laban. And they apparently weren't very close to Laban. They weren't located very close, because it took Laban 3 days to learn that they'd all left. And he took his brethren with him and pursued after him 7 days' journey. Brethren, that was probably meaning his sons, Laban's sons, and probably some of his friends and whatnot. Brethren is an umbrella term. And pursued after him 7 days' journey, and they overtook him in the Mount Gilead, meaning that they stopped Jacob from going any further. And God came to Laban the Syrian in a dream by night, and said unto him, Take heed that thou speak not to Jacob either good or bad. He says, you better not shake this cage. You don't know what you're getting yourself into. Much like how God dealt with Abimelech, the king of Gerar, whenever Abraham and Sarah were mixed up with him. He took Sarah, and God gave him a dream, and it terrified him. We went over that. You can check that video out. But it's the very same way. God will do this an awful lot. If he really wants his will to be done, he'll visit your enemies in dreams and just obvious ways. God will fight for you. As one of the most lovely things that I've ever read in the scripture is in Ezekiel. He says, I am for you. He says, I'm not against you. He says, I am for you. You don't know a friend like me. He says, I'm your best of friends. And, so this is God watching over Jacob in a time when Jacob knew nothing. And the warning through the dream, I believe, also testifies to Laban's evil intent towards Jacob. He had it in his heart, I would say, to go and use violence against him, as we'll learn right here. Then Laban overtook Jacob. Now Jacob had pitched his tent in the mount, and Laban with his brethren pitched in the mount of Gilead. And Laban said to Jacob, What hast thou done, that thou hast stolen away unawares to me? Meaning he left without telling him. And carried away my daughters as captives, taken with the sword. He's being very melodramatic here. And he says, you kidnapped my daughters and my grandsons and my cattle. You've stolen all of them, you thief. And Jacob's like, what? And we already read the attitude that Rachel and Leah, his daughters, had towards him. They couldn't wait to leave. They was like, well, just get us away from our dad. But you see how all of a sudden Laban's the victim. A lot of people do this whenever they always feel like they're the ones in the wrong. This is what perpetrators of evil usually will do. And I can just see it on the day of judgment whenever Jesus says, and there'll be weeping, wailing, and gnashing of teeth. Gnashing of teeth has anger. And I see a lot of people on that day feeling like it's a wrong thing for them not to get to go to heaven. And they'll be angry with Christ on that day. They'll be angry with God. And they'll do them absolutely no good, because weeping and wailing is also in the mix of that. But oh yeah, poor Laban, Wherefore didst thou flee away secretly, and steal away from me, and didst not tell me, that I might have sent thee away with mirth, and with songs, with tabret, and with harp? He said, I'd have threw you a great celebration. Oh yeah, I'm certain of that. That's why you bring all your sons and your kid to do battle with him, and why God has to warn you in a dream. See, he's a liar. He lies. I mean, it takes nothing for him to lie to Jacob. And hast not suffered me to kiss my sons and my daughters. Thou hast now done foolishly in so doing. Meaning, you didn't allow me to hug them and kiss them and wish them good. And I'm certain that Laban, like any grandpa, he would have missed his grandkids and his daughters. I'm certain of that. But he's stretching this out in order to make him look like the victimized party. Now we see him say this. His attitude totally changes. It is in the power of my hand to do you hurt. But the God of your fathers spake unto me yesternight, saying, Take thou heed that thou speak not to Jacob either good or bad. That puts Laban in a very harsh position. I'd oftentimes, whenever people don't have the fear of God in them, they think to themselves, well, God's not going to do anything, and the way that God comes against you is not like how men come against you. It's not slitting your tires, like if you anger a woman, she may key your car or something like that. But no, the way that God, whenever you anger God, and God has warned you repeatedly, don't do this, and you do it, and you do it, and you keep doing it, God will use a method in which you never expected. I've used my own experience before, how whenever I backslid on drugs and very much did not need them, it was very much killing me, the drugs that I was using. And I remember just in 48-hour period, 1 48-hour period, my cell phone, the data shut off, my money was all gone, my schedule for work was gone, my car broke down, all the fluid in it was all drained, every bit that we could check, every bit of it was drained. It shut down on me while I was backing out of the driveway, as a matter of fact. It had just enough power to start and for me to get going out of the driveway. And I was right in the middle of these, like, project style. See, it's a poor neighborhood, and I remember I was backing out. It had never given me trouble like this. And I started to pull forward, and it shuts down on me. I tried to get out and push it back, and I couldn't. Well, they wound up towing it, and that costed me $150 more that I did not have. Within that, so I lost my car, my phone, my schedule, almost my job. I got a letter from I got an eviction notice, like how the landlord had heard about my drug use. Now I was a Christian too, and I was heavy backslidden, and everything just crumbling. Everything was crumbling. Plus my body, I can't even describe what my body was going through. It was physically deteriorating. I hadn't ate in, I think it was 2 weeks, and I hadn't drank any water hardly at all. I had to force myself to drink water because all I wanted to do was get high. So I had lost, I think it was 40 pounds in 30 days or something like that. It was unbelievable. I was just wasting away. Everybody at my job knew that I was on it. I'd show up high everywhere that I went. My landlord knew that I was on. Everybody. And I actually had people try to break into my home while I was home. And because I had to pawn my guns. I mean, it just got so bad. I was unarmed, and whenever I caught them trying to break into my home, there was 5 of them. And I remember they started to call me outside because they wanted to fight. And these were 5 grown men. And I didn't have any guns because I had pawned them the day before. That's because I needed money. And it was just so bad. It was within about a 2 or 3 day period, my life crumbled. Absolutely crumbled. And I knew it was coming. I could feel it coming. And I just wanted to keep doing what God was telling me not to. And so God will use things that you never will foresee. So Laban better watch his little threats right here. I've learned you can't be boastful about anything. It is in the power of my hand to do you hurt. No, it's not. And now, though thou wouldest needs be gone, because thou sore longest after thy father's house, yet wherefore hast thou stolen my gods? Now he's talking about when Rachel took his little teraphims, like we'd already shown. And Jacob answered and said to Laban, because I was afraid, for I said, peradventure thou wouldest take by force thy daughters from me. He says, what if you take your daughters from me? He says, you just may do that, so I didn't tell you anything. With whomsoever thou findest thy gods, let him not live. Before our brethren, discern thou what is thine with me, and take it to thee. For Jacob knew not that Rachel had stolen them, his beloved wife, whom he loved more than anything, had taken these little teraphim gods. And there's a variety of reasons. During my studies, I've seen that it's a Jewish tradition that they say Rachel took these teraphim in order to keep her father Laban from idol worship. But the very fact that she kept them. She didn't just throw them off and bury them or try to burn them or anything along the way. She didn't do any of that. She had plenty of opportunity, and she kept them. And Laban went into Jacob's tent, and into Leah's tent, and into the 2 maidservants' tent, but he found them not. Then went he out of Leah's tent, and entered into Rachel's tent. This is so bizarre to me, how these were gods to him. What puny, weak little things. These basically toys. What kind of God can be just picked up and stolen? And you worship this thing? It's just so utterly absurd. We see how in the book of Isaiah, he talks about how men would cut down a tree. They'd use some of it to warm their hands, and then they'd use it to cook with, and then they would start to carve it into a god, and then they'd lay down on the ground and worship it. That's how foolish that these pitiful little toys are. Now Rachel had taken the images, which are the little gods, and put them in the camel's furniture and sat upon them. And Laban searched all the tent, but found them not. She took basically the saddle off the camel, the things that you would put on camels in order to ride them, and she placed them underneath it, and she sat on them. And she said to her father, Let it not displease my lord that I cannot rise up before thee, for the custom of women is upon me. And he searched, but found not the images. So she says, it's that time of month, menstruating, so I can't stand up. Don't make me stand up. So, do you see how the deception is just so deep within this entire family? Just seems to be all about deception, little gods, and bickering, controversies, constant competition between one another. Now there's deception again. It's always something with this family. You see the chaos involved in it. It's no wonder it was just such an unbearable situation, and no wonder Jacob, as we talked about yesterday, how he told the Pharaoh, "My days have been filled with evil." He said, "It's constant evil upon me in these days," and that's why I don't see why people want to cling to this world. Like, just be done with it. Be done with this world, and just look at this as a job that we have to work, and then one day we'll punch out and go home. And Jacob was wroth and chode with Laban. And Jacob answered and said to Laban, What is my trespass? What is my sin that thou hast so hotly pursued after me? Now, I'm speaking in a very monotonous tone, but this is not being monotonous. This is 20 years of build-up, which Jacob probably planned to say. And this was just anger brewing. You can just tell it and just reading it. Whereas thou hast searched all my stuff, what hast thou found of all my household stuff? Set it here before my brethren and thy brethren, that they may judge betwixt us both. This kind of reminds me of whenever someone's working for a really bad employer, and then they just decide to quit. They've made enough money so they can quit, and then the employer comes up and he starts harassing them, like thinking that he's still got that power over them, and then you get to kind of just say whatever you really feel like you've been wanting to say for 20 years to this man or woman in whom has just vexed you day by day with something. This 20 years have I been with thee. Thy ewes and thy she-goats have not cast their young, and the rams of thy flock have I not eaten. He says that none of them miscarried, because he would take such good care of them, referring to Laban's flock, and he also took none of them to eat. That which was torn of beast I brought not unto thee, I bear the loss of it. Of my hand didst thou require it, whether stolen by day or stolen by night. So any of his flock that were grabbed by whatever kind of beast, and whenever they would kill it, which this would happen from time to time, still happens, but anytime that he would find one of them slaughtered, it was usually where the shepherd could come back. This was a custom. You could come back as a shepherd with the body and keep them from ravaging it, and show the owner of the flock, and he would excuse it and wouldn't take it out of your pay or anything. But Jacob did not keep this custom. He said, no, I went the extra mile, and I just replaced it with my own. I didn't bring anything back to you. I didn't even worry you with it. I just replaced it with my own. Thus I was in the day the drought consumed me, and the frost by night, and my sleep departed from mine eyes. You can see right here how Jacob says that whenever the drought consumed me, whenever he was in perils, whenever he was thirsty, or whenever it was frost by night, whenever he was cold, and then he says sleep departed from mine eyes, and he says I didn't get much sleep many nights, he said, because I was worried about your business. So this is a good worker in whom Laban is desiring almost to keep as a slave instead of just a hired servant. Thus have I been 20 years in thy house. I served thee 14 years for thy 2 daughters, and 6 years for thy cattle, and thou hast changed my wages 10 times. Except the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac, had been with me, surely thou hadst seen me away now empty. He would have sent him away now empty. God hath seen my affliction and the labor of my hands, and rebuked thee yesternight. It's quite a shame that Jacob doesn't refer to him as his God at this time, if you'll notice. He says, the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac, implying Isaac fears God. So it's God in whom is dealt. It's good that he acknowledges that. It's good that he's aware of it, but it's just a shame that he doesn't refer to him as his God at this time. And Laban answered and said unto Jacob, these daughters are my daughters, and these children are my children, and these cattle are my cattle, and all that thou seest is mine. And what can I do this day unto these my daughters, or unto their children which they have borne? Oh, you just talk about somebody, you just, he says, this is all still mine, but you can have them. He says they obviously traveled with you. He's unwilling to relinquish his pride in the midst of all this. He kind of, I think, sees that maybe Jacob has a bit of a point. Maybe there's some justification behind what he's saying. Now therefore come thou, let us make a covenant, I and thou, and let it be for a witness between me and thee. And Jacob took a stone and set it up for a pillar. And Jacob said unto his brethren, gather stones. And they took stones and made it an heap, and they did eat there upon the heap. And Laban called it Jegar-sahadutha, but Jacob called it Gilead. Now, these mean the same thing, only Laban called his in the Syriac verbiage, which is, they both mean the same. It's a heap of witness. This altar was to be a heap of witness, a heap of a promise made, in order to show their promise one to another. And Laban said, this heap is a witness between me and thee. This day, therefore, was the name of it called Gilead and Mizpah. For he said, the Lord watch between me and thee when we are absent one from another. Mizpah means watch. And these are strong words used right here. The Lord watch between me and thee when we are absent one from another. If thou shalt afflict my daughters, or if thou shalt take other wives beside my daughters, no man is with us. See, God is witness betwixt me and thee. It's threatening. I've seen dads do this tons of times. They even make shirts out of this. I have a gun and a shovel and don't hurt my daughter and stuff. So this may be that type of attitude coming out of Laban. And Laban said to Jacob, behold this heap, and behold this pillar, which I have cast betwixt me and thee. This heap be witness, and this pillar be witness, that I will not pass over this heap to thee, and that thou shalt not pass over this heap and this pillar unto me for harm. He's saying we're no longer to cross over these pillars if we wish to harm one another. This is making a peace promise. We will keep peace. You'll stay over here. I'll stay over here. We'll never go to war. The God of Abraham and the God of Nahor and the God of their father judge betwixt us. And Jacob sware by the fear of his father Isaac. One quick note. This is actually a good thing. God commands, whenever a man finds a wife, that he is to leave father and mother and to join unto his wife. So it's not a bad thing to separate from your in-laws. It's almost like it's a separate family now. In a way, it's a separate branch from this tree. Let's not get others involved. No sense in it. Then Jacob offered sacrifice upon the mount, and called his brethren to eat bread. And they did eat bread, and tarried all night in the mount. And early in the morning Laban rose up, and kissed his sons and his daughters, and blessed them. And Laban departed, and returned unto his place. So Laban, they stayed all night. They talked one last long farewell, because they would never see Laban again. And this was a very good thing. Laban was a very worldly individual, and he sought many, many things of the world, and God needed Jacob to be separated from that. He said, okay, now you worry about your sons. Don't let any more of your mind be concerned with Laban and what he's wanting. He says, you worry about what I want from now on. So it says God. I mean, it's so amazing how right after the birth of Joseph, and he increases him greatly in order so that he can support his family. And this is so God. This is every bit of this is God doing the bigger picture of all of this. But I do like the way that it wound up. May the God of all peace be with you. Amen.